NBA draft fans, we're continuing with part 2 of my top 30 big board. Of course, in this video, we're going to be talking about prospects 1 through 15 and the way that I see them going in this NBA draft cycle. Of course, this is not a mock draft, but my big board version 4. Make sure to check out picks number 16 through 30 as well. The 16th to 30th best players in this year's class in my own estimation. And remember, I do watch all of these players every single time before making any of these videos. So a ton of work, ton of time, ton of effort goes into this. So if you guys are new to utility sports, make sure to subscribe. You'll see more of my NBA draft content moving forward and a whole bunch of other NBA coverage as well. And also in today's video only, I will actually be putting my own personal Instagram link in the description. So only in today's video will my Instagram link be there. Go ahead, give me a follow. My account is private, but I will be accepting all follow requests from this video. So go ahead, do that now. We also have utility sports socials in there, such as our Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. So go give those follows as well. But if you want to, give my Instagram a follow as well. Would love to have you guys on my own Instagram. You'll see some videos of me playing basketball, as well as my girlfriend, if that's any interest to you. Let's go ahead here now into number 15. I got EJ Liddell, forward out of Ohio State. At 6'7", he's actually a really rare type of forward. At 21 years old, he really improved this past year for the Buckeyes, specifically on the defensive side of the floor, but also took a massive step offensively, averaged nearly 3 blocks a game this past year for Ohio State. And at 6'7", it's not very often you find a player who can protect the rim like Liddell does. As a weak side rim protector, has very good vertical athleticism, and I think most importantly, great shot timing as a shot blocker. And he's someone who a lot of his blocks aren't going to come necessarily as an anchor to a defense, but he comes flying out of nowhere to pin a shot off the glass or to get a rejection coming off the corner shooter. And all of a sudden, it's a big swing of momentum. And I think Liddell, it's very rare you have a junior at this point where you have a top 15 player who's a junior. Usually, if they're that good, they come out as either a freshman or a sophomore. And I think that's a testament to EJ Liddell's development. He has gotten way better each and every year he's gone back to college. And to only be 21 on the day of the draft, I think is actually pretty vital to his draft stock. 21 years old is not that old. Everyone looks at juniors like they're ancient. It is older for sure, but the difference between a 21 and a 19-year-old isn't really that massive, because you look at some of these 19-year-olds and you have to ask yourself, are they going to be as good as EJ Liddell in 2 years? And the answer to that for a lot of the players in this class is simply no. Liddell's a very good player who continues to get better. And at 21 years old, no one's potential is tapped out. Players continue to get better, usually up until their late 20s. And then, of course, the athleticism tends to peak off a little bit there at that point. But Liddell, you're looking at probably 7-8 good years ahead of him in the NBA before you even have to start worrying about some of that athleticism fading. So again, through his whole rookie contract and most of that extension afterward, I think Liddell's going to be a very valuable player in the league, specifically because he shoots the 3-ball well, can knock down ISO jump shots in the mid-range area, and then is also someone who defensively I think is going to be a plus. I don't think he's going to be a great on-ball perimeter defender. I think he's going to be solid in that regard, but I think where he's really special is as a help defender. And for teams, if you have a guard who maybe doesn't hold up super great on that end of the floor, say like a LaMelo Ball or Trae Young, EJ Liddell does make a lot of sense as a pairing with some of those types of players. You could also look at maybe Dallas as well with Luka Doncic. Then we move into 14. I've got Hugo Besson, who does slide a little bit in my big board here. Previously been hovering right around that number 11 mark, pulled him down to 14 here. And I think the biggest reason why is I'm starting to get more confident in some of the other players that jumped him, and less confident in him. I don't think I'm losing any confidence in him. The reason why I pulled him down a little bit is just because I felt like other players deservingly jumped him. Now, out of the NBL, he is a really, really nice shooter. And again, at 21 years old, 6'5", he's a solid combo guard and a very talented playmaker with the ball in his hands. That's really where he's seen a lot of improvement this past year. The French guard, I think he's going to be available near the second round, whether that's in the 20s where he goes or potentially early second. I have him much higher than that. I think this is a really good grab for whatever team gets him, because I think he's an offense in his own right. I've been using the term lately, gravity shooter. I talked about Steph Curry being the greatest gravity shooter of all time because of how much attention he draws, how many eyes are on him at all moments. Whenever he goes through any type of motion in an offense, everyone's worried about him. And you've seen the Warriors for years and years and years get easy slips to guys like Kevon Looney and Draymond Green and a whole bunch of other less skilled offensive players just because two guys miscommunicate defensively, want to make sure Steph Curry doesn't get an open three-point look, and all of a sudden something else is open. I think Hugo Besson has a little bit of that to him. I think he's going to be a really good gravity shooter in the league. Teams are going to want to keep him covered out on the three-point line. He has really great range, can shoot it off the bounce as well as off the catch. And it, for me, is someone who I think a lot of people are really sleeping on. I know he's shooting not a great percentage right now in the NBL, low 30s for percentage from three, but hear me out here. That's not the same as a guy who shoots 40% on all wide open catch and shoot threes. We all know that PJ Tucker is not nearly as good of a three-point shooter as a guy like Luka Doncic or Trae Young, even though at certain points PJ Tucker might be shooting a higher three-point percentage. Percentage is indicative of how good you are at shooting, with a combination of how good you are off the bounce and what types of shots you take. Luka Doncic takes way tougher shots than PJ Tucker, so naturally his three-point percentage is lower. And we all know if Luka Doncic got the wide open threes from the corner all the time, he would shoot a better percentage from three than PJ Tucker. And I think Hugo Besson falls in a similar path here, where I look at Hugo Besson and say, okay, if he wasn't shooting a fall-away three-pointer off the bounce or running off of a flare screen or down pick or some type of action where he has to catch it and shoot it quickly because defenses know that they have to close out on him, he would shoot a much higher percentage. And I think in his own right, he's going to really help an NBA offense. And most specifically, he's going to help others because of how much space he takes and really opens up for other players on the team. 13 now, Walker Kessler, who continues to climb up my board here and there a little bit more each and every time. And at 7'1", 245 pounds, I talked about at number 16, a little spoiler here if you haven't checked out the other video, where I had Mark Williams. I labeled Mark Williams a twinner between Duren and Kessler. And what I meant by that is Duren, very switchable, Kessler, a drop coverage big. And almost every single team in the league runs drop coverage at some point or another. The drop coverage is very common. It's where you leave your big back in a pick and roll and you try and get your guard to fight through it so you don't give up an open three. And the one thing about Walker Kessler is he's so big, he's going to be dominant as a drop coverage big. Look at how productive Jakob Poeltl is in that type of system with the San Antonio Spurs. I think Kessler can have massive success defensively in that system, which is one of the most commonly run systems in the NBA. So even though the league is very pace and space perimeter centric, there is still a lot of teams that run this drop coverage to try and protect shots at the rim. And Walker Kessler is enormous at this, both with his actual skill set, but also just his frame. 7'1", really great length. Not the most vertically explosive player in the class by any stretch, but he's got really good shot timing. I mean, the guy almost averaged nearly 5 blocks a game for Auburn this past year in the SEC. And if you want a comparison, Duke throughout the season averaged 6.5 as a team, and Walker Kessler nearly averaged 5 himself. That is how crazy of a defensive player this guy could be, specifically at the NBA level. And I just love him for drop coverage defense. I don't think he's going to be very useful in switchable style defenses. I don't think he's going to be very good in that regard out on the perimeter, but I think when you're actually using him the way that he's meant to be used, he's going to be really, really good in that role. Then at 12, Jeremy Sochan here. And we talked about role for Walker Kessler. I don't think there's a clear defined role at all for Jeremy Sochan, which is what makes him such an attractive prospect, specifically for GMs, because I think Jeremy Sochan, who could arguably become the best defensive player in this class, which you're going to hear me say that quite a bit for these top 15 guys. There's a few guys that have cases to become that. Jeremy Sochan's in the short list of players that could become that. And at 6'9", he did everything this past year for head coach Scott Drew for the Baylor Bears. At certain points was matched up with David McCormick, the center for the national championship winning Kansas Jayhawks. In that same game, guarded Ochai Agbaji, one of the best forwards in the country this past season. He guarded point guards at times, he guarded shooting guards, he guarded power forwards, guarded centers, guarded wings, did it all. And he did it all well. He's a phenomenal playmaker on the defensive side of the ball. He gets into the passing lanes, disrupts stuff, also can protect the rim. But I think the biggest thing with him is his positioning and his IQ. At only 18 years old, he'll be 19, on May 20th before draft night. he is a very smart defensive player. There was times where you see him working as a front to the post where he's not letting the post catch the ball super easily. And then times where he's operating behind the post, letting him catch it, but then stonewalling him there. Certain situations, he's 3/4 fronting, full front, back front, doesn't matter. He does it all, fights through seals, very smart, can switch out on the perimeter defensively. And if you want to go to a team that has, possibilities of running drop coverage, switch coverage, whatever you want, if you want to have a high ice with help underneath, Sochan can do it all at the NBA level. I think he's going to be a very good defensive player for an NBA team. Now, the bugaboo on him is offensively. He looks a little wild and sporadic, can't really score the ball with consistency, but he does have a little bit of point forward to him. And I think realistically probably fits best as a small ball center, but it's tough to do that all year long. He's a solid rebounder. He's not going to be able to rebound with the Rudy Goberts of the world. That's just the reality here. So if you're going to play Sochan, you have to have a pretty good understanding of what you want to do around him. Maybe some other good size and rebounding next to him. If you're going to play him at the 5, you'd probably want to have a talented, bigger 4-man next to him as well. So Sochan does make a lot of sense. I think he's going to be a really good player and someone who continues to climb up a lot of people's boards. 11 here. Johnny Davis out of Wisconsin, a player who continues to slide down people's boards and obviously just left a bad taste in our mouth with the final game of the season and his inefficiency from the field. At times this year, we saw him go crazy with 11 for 17 type of games where he puts up 30 plus points. And you're like, wow, could Johnny Davis be a top 5 pick? And then there's times where, he goes 2 of 13 or 3 of 14. And you're like, oh, don't know if I like that from Johnny Davis. And the reasoning for that is based on his play style, right? He's a shot creator who takes a ton of tough shots. And when he has it on, he has it on. And when he's off, he's off. And that's going to be the one thing you have to deal with if you draft him. And for a multi-million-dollar investment, there are going to be some concerns about that. But the one thing I can say about Johnny Davis, very competitive player. He's going to guard his own position very well at the NBA level. He's got pretty good hands defensively, and he's a good athlete. So Johnny Davis, someone who took a massive step forward in his sophomore campaign for Wisconsin. I think he's worth a lottery pick still. I would have no concerns taking him in the lottery. There's just a few other players that I do prefer ahead of him. But overall, I think Johnny Davis, a pretty good player in his own right. And then at 10 here, I've got Jaden Hardy, G League Ignite player. And this is going to come as a surprise because I do have him over Johnny Davis. And some people are going to say, wow, why is that? What's the case with that? Well, Jaden Hardy, a little bit younger. And the biggest thing here for me, people look at Jaden Hardy's shooting percentage as the biggest reason why not to take him. And yes, he shot about 36% from the field this past year for G League Ignite, which is not a very attractive percentage by any means when it comes to a draft prospect. But last year we saw Zaire Williams get drafted by the Memphis Grizzlies in the top 10 when he shot about 39% from the field for Stanford at the collegiate level. And we all know the G League is a much better talented league than college. Most of the best college players end up being decent players in the G League. So Jaden Hardy, who did okay against some of these G League players, not great, but again, at 19 years old, first time playing professional basketball, and did have a lot of scoring outputs and games where he looked really good. And the biggest thing for me as well with Jaden Hardy, he's not going to be as good defensively as Johnny Davis, but he's a much better playmaker at this point of his career. I think he puts more pressure on the rim consistently, and I think he's able to facilitate to bigs and also perimeter shooters a little bit more consistently than Johnny Davis. I think these two players are close. I have Hardy over Davis just by a sliver in this big board. Last big board, it was flipped, and maybe by V5, it'll be flipped back to Johnny Davis as I watch these guys more and more. I've spent hundreds of hours watching these players, so it's not that it's just willy-nilly switching. To be honest, I'm feeling like I'm getting it really down pat to what I want. There's just certain things that I see and certain days I feel a little bit differently. So Jaden Hardy here today, I just feel like I give him a narrow edge over Johnny Davis. Then at 9, Keegan Murray, who moved up a couple spots on his own. And I actually got really close to moving him above the number 8 guy, but I just felt like I couldn't do that. At 6'8", 225, 21 years old, he's a really great fit into the NBA because he's one of those selfless forwards who's going to defend very well on the defensive side of the ball, can act as a weak side rim protector. I talked about that before in this episode where I talked about how weak side rim protection could be really helpful in protecting the rim, even if you're not a true anchor, but he also defends his own position well, like I talked about with Johnny Davis. And I think Keegan Murray is going to be a solid defensive player, but offensively as well. He averaged 20 plus points a game this past year for the Hawkeyes. And again, yes, their season didn't end the way they wanted it to, but Keegan Murray was very successful all year long, even without a ton of talent around him. And the one thing I think about Keegan, he's going to be great in the NBA because you don't need to draw something up for him. He's going to go hunt down an offensive rebound, or he's going to space out, knock down an open three, or he's going to be able to post up a smaller matchup and score at the rim. There's so many different ways you can use him, and without really having to try and use him, if you know what I mean. Like, coaches don't have to say, oh, let's go get Keegan Murray the ball so he can score. No, Keegan Murray just finds ways to get the ball and score. And that's a really valuable thing. And as someone who I myself am a coach, I look for players like Keegan Murray that can help my team. And if I've got a player I want to run through, you put other players on the floor like a Keegan Murray to try and make everything gel and flow. And I think he's going to be a really nice, productive player at the NBA level. Then at 8, I have AJ Griffin here. And I really thought about Keegan Murray over AJ Griffin. I just couldn't do it. At 6'6", 225 pounds, very NBA ready body. His father played in the NBA. I'm very confident AJ Griffin's going to be really good, specifically as a shooter, because he's already got the masterful skill down of three-point shooting that we call the escape dribble. Anytime you watch AJ Griffin, you're going to see him use the escape dribble against hard closeouts where they go flying by him, and he takes one little side step to the left or right and then knocks down an open three-point shot because he's got good patience, good understanding of what to do on the perimeter. And he's also someone who, at only 18 years old, I think there's a lot of room for him to improve. Potential is not based off of age specifically, but being at only 18 years old and showing some of the tangible gifts that he has as an athlete, someone who can attack the rim, and just a skilled three-point shooter, I still think there's a lot to unlock here with him. Specifically defensively, he has a bad tendency right now of putting hands on quicker players. I don't think he's going to be able to guard point guards early in his career specifically, but he's going to guard 2 through 4 right away on day one. And I think down the road, if you sharpen up his footwork a little bit, you know, I talked about Ron Harper Jr. From 16 through 30, and I talked about how Ron Harper Jr.'s technique allows him to guard point guards despite not being super quick, and someone who is laterally super gifted. I think AJ Griffin kind of follows the same pathway there as Ron Harper Jr., but with more offensive upside. But I also think AJ Griffin, if you get his technique down, fix some of the footwork fundamentals on him, maybe he could start guarding point guards. You know, we've seen guys like Dorian Finney-Smith in the past really improve, and Reggie Bullock take massive step forwards. And there's others in the league as well. Mikal Bridges has really improved his footwork since coming into the league. Even though everyone knew he was going to be a good defensive player, he has taken strides in that direction as well. And I think AJ Griffin, if you get the right coaching and development around him, could become a monster defensive asset as well as a good offensive player. Then at 7, we got Ben Mathurin here from Arizona, another wing here who probably plays as a 2 or 3 and is only 19 years old at the time I'm recording this, and will be freshly 20 by the day of the NBA draft, which is awesome to see because as a sophomore himself, not very often you see someone as young as him in the sophomore class. And I think the biggest thing with Mathurin here for me is he is vertically explosive and can also punch the ball home down on you, and is a talented three-point shooter as well with really high rise on his jump shots. He knocks it down with consistency from deep, can shoot upwards of 25 feet from distance. So, you know, multiple feet behind the arc. He's going to adjust very well to the NBA game, specifically with the pace of play and the spacing. One thing about Bennedict Mathurin as well for me is I think he's a very good on-ball defender and someone who is going to be a great gap defender. I think he's good on ball. I think he can be great off the ball, specifically as someone who on the perimeter is going to jump a lot of passing lanes, be disruptive, and his athleticism, he's going to use it to his advantage. The one thing I'd like to see from him more is just cutting without the ball in his hands. He's very good at it when he does it. He just is a little reluctant to do that. He does it occasionally, specifically at dribble at actions where, you know, the point guard will dribble at him and then they'll, you know, signal a backdoor cut. That's probably part of Arizona's offensive scheme. And I would like Mathurin to probably capitalize on that more out of specific situations. I just felt watching him this year that he did miss opportunities to use his athleticism as a cutter, but he does put a lot of pressure on the rim as a ball handler. I saw someone compare him to a Buddy Hield, and I just thought that was a terrible take. I see him more as a Tim Hardaway Jr. and Mikal Bridges combo here, where I think he's got some of the defensive upside of a Mikal Bridges, not nearly as good. I don't think he'll be as good as Mikal Bridges, but I think he's got also the offensive capabilities of a Tim Hardaway Jr., who I think is more of a complete all-around offensive player than a Buddy Hield, who's more of a three-point shooter off the move type of player. Then we move on to 6, and I've got Shaedon Sharpe here now. So Shaedon Sharpe makes his debut into my big board here because he had just recently declared for the NBA draft. And of course, I've got him listed out of Kentucky. John Calipari believes this kid is someone who would be worthy of a number 1 overall selection after watching him. I can agree that, maybe he would be a top 3 pick, specifically if he had waited for what his true class should have been, which is next year. You look at players like Victor Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson, and then you would also have Shaedon Sharpe. Those are probably the top 3 next year if Sharpe had waited, but he's going to come out this year. And it's a really tough class to be a top 3 pick in, specifically without any collegiate film. So I think that's going to limit where he could potentially get drafted. But at 6'6", 200 pounds, 18 years old, I wouldn't be shocked if we see this kid go in the top 5. He's very, very vertically explosive, and he's a natural scorer of the basketball, averaged over 22 points per game the last time we saw this kid play basketball, and is someone who is a consistent lob threat, and he hangs in the air. He's got a really good skill set as well on the perimeter, pretty solid ball handler. And I've seen this before. I'm someone who coaches high school basketball, so I feel like I can evaluate high school talent. And with Shaedon Sharpe, when I saw Cade Cunningham first play at the high school level, I knew he was going to be the first overall pick. I knew that. I knew he was worthy of that. And the more I watch Shaedon Sharpe, the more I think that he would be right in that top 3 realm. And just the fact that I know Victor Wembanyama and I know Scoot Henderson, I know that it's going to be a tough class to have been number 1 in. So that's why I'm reluctant to say Sharpe would be number 1 in that class, but there's a good chance he would have at least competed for that spot. So having him 6th here on my board is a testament to how good this class is, and also the fact that I'm a little less sure on him just because we don't have college film, which, you'd look at a guy like Shaedon Sharpe, I think he's talented, I think he's gifted, but again, I thought the same things about BJ Boston when I watched him at high school, and then he just failed to really catch on at the collegiate level, and it really hurt his draft stock. I don't think the same will happen for Shaedon Sharpe. He's a little bit more vertically explosive than a guy like BJ Boston was. And I think the physicals are off the chart here. It's just a little bit more of a risk pick if you're taking him. At 5, Jalen Duren out of Memphis, and he continues to climb up my boards. A few big boards ago, he was around number 7 or 8. Then the last one, he was at 6 with no Shaedon Sharpe. And now he's at 5 with Shaedon Sharpe. So you can tell Jalen Duren's on a positive climb in my big boards, and every time I watch him, I get more and more impressed. He's 18 years old. He will be one of the youngest players in the class, and he is physically dominant. There's a chance he could be the most dominant player from this class, specifically on the interior with his size and frame, and also his hand-eye coordination. I think that's one thing that doesn't get talked enough about. Very coordinated when it comes to catching the ball and finishing above the rim. And I know that doesn't sound like a big thing, but think about all the times the Jazz tried throwing the ball to Rudy Gobert, and all of a sudden he doesn't catch the ball and it's a lost opportunity. You will never have that with Jalen Duren. And then the biggest thing for him, and I just can't unsee it since the first time I thought about it, I just think Bam Adebayo. Every time I watch this kid play, I'm going to do a scouting profile on him soon, so hopefully you guys can all see the clips I'm talking about that I have pretty much prepared for him to talk about. But he's very switchable out in space, really great rim protection capabilities as well. Does not get himself out of plays very frequently, and even when it looks like he's out of a play, he probably flies in and swats it. And there's certain times where you just can't keep him off the glass, and is a very, very polished player defensively. People keep talking about him like he doesn't have a skill set, and I understand what they're saying from an offensive perspective. He's shown a little bit of a back to the basket game, pretty solid face-up game, just given where he's at as an 18-year-old. I think there's a lot that he can unlock yet in those areas. But I also want to point out he's a pretty good passer for a center, throws a lot of breakout passes, and is also someone who I think you put him in a short roll situation, he's going to be able to make the right decision, whether that means throwing it up to a lob guy sitting dunker spot or finding an outside perimeter shooter. I think he's someone who offensively has some real gifts, specifically as a playmaker. And then defensively, we can't overlook his ability to switch, his ability to protect the rim, great shot blocking timing, and a phenomenal rebounder. We can't label that as not skilled. Okay, just because he's big and strong, not every 6'11" guy rebounds like he does. Not every 6'11" guy protects the rim like he does. I'm telling you, Jalen Duren's special, and I'm really starting to buy stock in this kid. Which leads us here into 4, and this is where it gets really, really tough, right? Because the top 4 players are very talented, and there's just narrowly differences between them that helps me decide. For me, with Paolo Banchero here, I have him at 4th, but there's no hate to him. If I had to go win a game right now, and I had to pick any of these college players as my pick for one game, I would probably choose Paolo Banchero to be my best player because I think he's the most NBA ready as we currently talk. I think he's the most ready to come into the league. And if I had to really bet, it depends on the situation where they land and who drafts who, but I would probably bet Paolo Banchero for Rookie of the Year. And that goes to show how strong this class is because I have him at 4th, and I think he's got a really great long-term upside as well to him. I liken him a lot to Carmelo Anthony when Anthony was on the New York Knicks because I think Banchero has a great face-up game. You work him in the post. He's also got a pretty solid handle to him at 6'10", pretty decent defensively, specifically on the interior. And I know that's going to raise some eyebrows that I said that. I think the biggest thing with him is he closes out off balance to perimeter shooters. I think he comes out with the idea of, I need to get up close to him. I think coaching can fix a lot of the issues Banchero has defensively. He's a good athlete with fluid hips. We've seen that on the offensive side of the ball. I just think that there's a lot of fundamental techniques that Banchero is just not simply aware of. Now, I don't know if he's going to listen to coaching on that. Maybe that's an internal issue that I just don't have insight to. But Banchero, there's room for him to improve defensively, and I think his offensive skill set is very, very polished and ready. He's a great young player. And having him 4, it almost feels like a disservice to have a player at 4 when they're as talented as Banchero. But it's just because I think the other 3 maybe have higher upside than him. And we'll talk about that here with Jabari Smith, who I have at 3. And one thing I'm starting to notice here, specifically with the lingo around Jabari Smith, is people are starting to talk about his upside and potential like it's almost already given skill sets, okay? Because Jabari Smith, the one thing I'll say about him right now, very skilled shot maker. When a hand in his face, with where he shoots the basketball high above his head, the elevation he gets on his jump shot, and the skill set he actually has as a shooter, he's going to knock a lot of those down, which is where he draws some comparisons to Kevin Durant. I do not think he will be Kevin Durant, okay? But I understand why some of those comparisons come because he's a very skilled shot maker. Like I said, at 6'10", it's hard to not compare him to Kevin Durant. But the one thing about him is he has a very loose handle yet at this point, is not super comfortable putting the ball on the deck for more than 2 dribbles. And this is what I'm talking about with Jabari Smith. People talk about him like he's going to be some mega half-court offensive superstar, and there's definitely potential for that, right? He's only 18 years old at this point when I'm recording, and we've seen some really great stuff from him, but there's still a lot of room to improve, which is why he's such an attractive prospect, is because he has a lot of room to improve. And the shot making aspect is the most important thing, right? He makes a ton of tough shots. And if he can find ways to get to the rim more consistently, put the ball on the deck, score in the mid-range a little bit more often, it'll be awesome. And I think the upside too is defensively. I think there's a lot that he can become. I don't think he's necessarily there yet. He's not a finished product. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Banchero is more of a finished product, yet I have Jabari Smith higher on my board because I think 4 or 5 years from now, Jabari Smith will probably be the better player. That is what I'm projecting, but it also takes development to get there. And Jabari Smith is more likely to be a bust than Paolo Banchero because his skill set is currently lower in my estimation, but it's not lower by much. And I think his upside is much higher. So for me, I would take Jabari Smith over Paolo Banchero, which is why I have him above him on my board. But Jabari Smith's not a finished product yet, and we have to see some more progression from him. Moving into 2, I've got Chet Holmgren, and this is the perfect example, right? Chet Holmgren's a player we talk about knowing that he's not a finished product, and I just feel like people haven't been keeping that same energy for Jabari Smith. Chet Holmgren, honestly, with skill set right now, is a better playmaker than Jabari Smith. I think he's a better defensive player than Jabari Smith currently, and I think he's a fairly well-defined shooter at this point as well, which Jabari Smith is too. But everyone talks about Chet Holmgren with potential, and they should be. The potential is off the charts for him. I just want people to keep that same energy about Jabari Smith. But with Chet Holmgren here, the obvious upside is defensively. At 7'1", I think he's got anchor potential, like we talked about with a guy like Walker Kessler. He can protect the rim with the best of them. He can also switch out into space like Duren, which is why this is such a scary combination. Usually you don't find a guy who can protect the rim at an elite level who can also switch out into space, and Chet Holmgren has the potential to do both, with potential to also be a playmaking ball handler for you in transition, someone you can work the high-low game out of, can also step out to the three-point line, knock it down with regularity and consistency, and is also someone who, at certain points, you could rely on to be your best player offensively, knows how to play without the ball in his hands, can play with it in his hands. Now, I don't think he's going to be the team's best player offensively on a championship team, but I think he's a really unique special talent. I have him narrowly above Jabari Smith, and I mean very narrowly. 2 and 3 were the closest for me, and also one's not far ahead of number 2 here in Chet Holmgren either. I know that my top 4 has been fairly consistent throughout these big boards, but I'm telling you, they are very narrow. There's just tiny things I prefer about each player, which leads us to number 1 here. And I have Jaden Ivey, and anyone who's been watching the channel knows how much I love Jaden Ivey as a prospect, but there's a lot of volatility here to this. For me, when I think about my big board, I think about how much success I could get out of them if I were the coach. If I were building a system around these guys, I think Jaden Ivey's got the highest upside, because I think with the way the modern NBA is played, you have a pick and roll guard who can also isolate, get to the rim whenever he wants, drive and kick, score at the rim, and knock down deep 3-point shots. Jaden Ivey does all of that. But also, if Jaden Ivey goes to a situation where a team plans on using him as a shooting guard, or not the primary ball handler, or someone who isn't allowed to go to work at the top of the key consistently, we're not going to see that level of production like we'll see from a Paolo Banchero or Jabari Smith, or maybe even Chet Holmgren. So if he lands into a different situation that's not as beneficial for him, we could see Jaden Ivey get limited. Whereas the other players, I think, probably fit into more systems consistently. But for me, I think Jaden Ivey could be the system. I think he could be the guy like we've seen from Ja Morant in Memphis. I think Jaden Ivey could be a franchise-changing player. And at 6'4", 195 pounds, one of the most athletic players I've ever evaluated, including Ja Morant. I think he's right there with Ja. He is jaw-dropping fun. He's going to put fans in the building, and I think he's going to ultimately win you games. Purdue had the best season they've had in quite some time, and it's not a surprise Jaden Ivey was right in the middle of it for the Boilermakers. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe as well to the channel, turn on the notification bell, check out our socials, link in the description, and also don't forget, today's the only video that I'll have my Instagram link in the bio, so make sure to go give me a follow on Instagram for my personal account. Again, thanks so much for watching, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy. There's a lot of work that goes into these videos, and if you disagree, let me know in the comment section. You know, we're talking hoops, so it's completely fine to disagree. Just make sure to be civil about it. And until next time, thanks for watching Utility Sports content, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.